Hello and welcome to another episode of Why the Beatles Matter. I'm having way too much fun with my friend and guest and bandmate, Dr. Andrea Trudeau. You may know Dr. Trudeau from other podcasts and other projects that she and I have been involved with. Andrea, welcome to Why the Beatles Matter. I know that you are bringing your no shush librarian persona to this and all the good things, but I'm so grateful that you're here and I'm excited to talk about why the Beatles matter.
Sean, it is such an honor and such a pleasure to be here with you this morning, just chatting about this amazing topic. So thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And I know that part of our friendship and our connection is the great love that we have for music. You especially are a connoisseur of live performances and concerts, and it's just great being able to kind of talk with you in this forum about music because I know music is something that's very important and personal to you.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. And I'm excited because the Beatles, I think, are one reason why I am such a music lover today. So I'm excited to kind of dig into that with you. But yeah, live music is my jam, and it is something that I'm trying to sort of invest more time and money into in the coming years now that my PhD is done, because it just brings me such joy and it's such a spiritual experience, and it just brings such connection with the people that I attend the concerts with.
That's awesome to hear. All of us in some way, shape, or form, if we are a fan of the Beatles, um, we have a personal connection to the band. And you made a very sly mention of that in your previous response about your fandom of the Beatles if has kind of shaped your perception and your love for music now. So everyone has a Beatles story or a Beatles memory in their life. What's yours? What was kind of like your first step into that realm?
So when you initially brought up this podcast and asked why the Beatles matter, my memory immediately went back to early 80s. I was maybe 5 or 6 years old at this point. And my parents were very protective of us. So if my mom was going to go out to dinner with friends or do something, my dad would hang at home. They never hired babysitters or anything. And it was then an opportunity for my dad to get out the vinyl and play music. So my dad is truly the reason why I'm the music lover that I am today. And I thank him because he shared such a depth and breadth of music with my brother and me. So he would play all kinds of music, and my brother and I would just dance around in our family room, or he'd like turn the music down. Like I'm thinking of Sympathy for the Devil by the Rolling Stones, the ooh, ooh part.
Yeah.
He'd turn it down so my brother and I could do that part. Like it was so interactive. Or he'd play classical music, and it was, what's the story you see in your mind? And so for me, when I think of the Beatles, I think of my dad and I think of dancing in the family room and I think of the White Album. The White Album was the first album that my dad shared with me. Um, I remember just the piggies and, oh blah dee, oh blah da, like just, and it's just as a child, it was such a good way to kind of hook me in. And then as I've aged, I've grown to love, all of their music, of course, for so many different reasons.
Wow. The White Album is such an eclectic choice. And from a child's perspective, I mean, there is a great the album is all over the place, first of all.
Yep.
And it's an album that has a very much a heavy sensibility with songs like Helter Skelter or Your Blues, but then there is this kind of fanciful part with songs like Piggies or the continuing story of Bungalow Bill or Oobla Dee Oobla Da. So I'm having this beautiful image of you as a young child dancing around to Piggies. What a great memory.
Yeah, it really was. And it's just, even just over break a couple days ago, I went with my parents, with my dad to see the Joffrey Ballet and to listen to the Nutcracker and was like welling up crying watching it because it's such, like I mentioned to you earlier, music is so deep and spiritual for me. And it's so rooted in it's connected to my relationships, to memories. I have a beautiful soundtrack to my life, and I'll hear a song and it immediately will whisk me back to certain points in time in my life. And I'm so grateful for that.
Yeah, that's music is that divine thread that's eternal, and it does evoke so many memories and feelings. What are those songs in the Beatles catalog that kind of do that for you? Um,
So another one that came to mind, I'm going to start, I'll go kind of chronologically. I was
okay.
thinking back, like growing up watching Sesame Street, and they love to do all these great parodies. And so there's Let It Be, and they have,
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
I loved that as a kid. And that was another way for me to kind of open my eyes to music. And it wasn't until I was older that I realized, oh, that's a real song that they like had made a parody of, and how cool that Sesame Street did that. And so that was really important to me. I think about Nike grabbed on to Revolution, and this is my cross country track days in high school. And I was really into the whole Nike Just Do It, and they were really pushing like female athletes at this time and empowering women in the 90s. And I remember this incredible commercial that had, Revolution, and it just inspired me so much. And even to like one of the first dances with my husband at our wedding was in my life. And so it just, the Beatles they have been woven throughout my entire life in different ways. And at that time, I think they are seemingly small, but looking back, I think they're really impactful and meaningful.
Mhm. Absolutely. And I love the image you shared of soundtrack of your life and very much, that I think that's what makes music so personal and so connected is that there are certain songs and certain albums that evoke a lot of emotion. So a song like In My Life, which um, John wrote for the Rubber Soul album, it's very much an autobiographical song, um, but it's universal enough that, you know, many people have an in my life story or a story about a certain song that evokes this kind of memory and connection, which lends itself to the universal nature of the band.
Absolutely. And I think too, like Blackbird has always been really impactful for me. And I know, I think I had read somewhere that Paul McCartney had written that to illustrate the struggle of African Americans here in the United States during the civil rights movement. But I think, and that's very powerful. And I think stepping even a step further out, looking at just this notion of struggle and overcoming adversity, and going back to my dad, when he turned 50, I put together this beautiful scrapbook of his life. And for some reason, that was the song I felt like I needed to include the lyrics because he had a very rough upbringing, like very abusive. Basically, he and my mom both had a hard time growing up and then realized what not to be as
Yeah.
parents. And they are incredible parents. And I'm amazed by everything they've overcome. And so for me to see everything he endured and all the betrayal and all the abuse, and for him to be such a kind and giving and amazing soul, like he embodies the Blackbird. And so that song, when I hear it, it always makes me think of him and how he's been able to get through the darkness and be the light. And I love that about him. And I'm amazed by him and what he's overcome in his life.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. I really am honored by you sharing that connection to your father and some of the challenges that he faced. So I'm very honored honored by that in the safe space of our friendship and this podcast. And one of the things about the band and their music is that it does there's songs and this is with any group that kind of helps us get through tough times and challenging times. Is there a particular Beatles song or album that does that for you, that when you turn it on, it gives you that energy or inspiration to carry on?
Well, as you know, you mentioned that I was the no shush librarian, so we play a lot of music in our school library, and it's kind of fun because when you come in the morning at 7:30, the students start arriving. At 7:45 is when everybody starts pouring in, and you got to set the tone for the day. And so here in Chicagoland, we're now in winter, and it's actually sunny today, but we'll have weeks upon weeks where you just don't see the sun.
Right.
And it can be everyone's just sort of tired, lethargic, down. So I love to crank up Good Day Sunshine in the library and just like bring the light and bring the sunshine, and it lifts my spirits and it lifts the students' spirits, and it just totally changes the energy and the climate of the space. And so we inject this goodness into our kids, and then at 8 o'clock we got to send them off to class, but we're hoping that they are leaving with smiles on their faces and a little pep in their step. So I think that song always brings me so much joy. It's a song too that I think during COVID, when we were all quarantining, I found myself going back to a lot of songs from my youth, almost like a comfort blanket or something. I was like listening to a lot of music from my high school years, especially. And it wasn't until we had sort of gotten through all of this that I looked back and reflected on like, why did I do that? And I think it's the same reason why I have kids still reading Diary of a Wimpy Kid 27 times in a row. We like the familiar, it brings us comfort. And so that song is one that I will always lean into when I need some joy and some light.
Yeah, that's such an upbeat, ebullient song, and I know Tracy Taylor, who was the first guest on this podcast, referenced that song in our conversation as well. A great track off the Revolver album. Uh, Speaking about the no shush librarian, Dr. Trudeau, and I know that you've done extensive work with school libraries and you've presented. You were just in Dubai at a conference. I know that we can talk about that, and I know you've got a big trip coming up in 2025 to Africa, which
Mhm.
kind of echoes in many ways the Beatles kind of global sensibility. But I know that a big part of your work is invitation and being very intentional about that. And I think one of the great things about the Beatles is that everyone was invited to kind of participate in Beatlemania. You mentioned the civil rights movement and the African American struggle in the '60s, and the Beatles were very, they had it in their contract that they were not going to play to segregated audiences, and they prevailed and got what they wanted. I think about, next month we're getting ready, and you'll see me geek out about this. The anniversary of their final performance on the rooftop, January 30th, 1969. There I am, Beatle geeking out. Um,
Love it.
it was a free concert for this film that
Mhm.
they were working on, and everyone you can kind of see in the Get Back, Let It Be film, people gathering around and straining to see them, and I would love for you to talk a little bit about this notion of how you're intentional as an educator with invitation and that space that you intentionally create in your library, which is kind of Beatlesque. It is very much like the opening of Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and come and see the show, and everyone gather in.
I love that. I had never thought of it that way, and that's pretty cool. Um, yeah, I think at the heart of my work, because this is my 27th year in education, at the heart of my work is humans. And it's the reason I got into this work. I've always really enjoyed, I mean, I've worked all 27 years in the same middle school. And when people hear that I'm choosing to work in a middle school and I've chosen to stay this long, they kind of look at me like I have a third eye. But I absolutely love them. And yes, I recognize that it's a rough developmental stage, but as you and I talked before that you hit play, like every age range, K6, 6, 8, 9, 12, they all have their challenges and their struggles. There is such an immense development, I think, between sixth and eighth grade. But I think back I think the reason that I operate this way is because when I was in seventh grade, so I went to a junior high that was seventh and eighth grade. And in seventh grade, my parents moved to the other side of our community in October. And I lost my friends. They were like, well, you're on the other side of town, on the other side of the tracks, and literally lost my friends that I had had through elementary school and had to completely rebuild in a time when I was deeply insecure and unsure of who I was. Had not found my footing. I was trying out for basketball, trying out for cheerleading, making nothing, like not making any of these teams, and just really feeling down on myself. And I think for me, it's been about being the teacher and now the librarian that I wish I had had when I was in those moments where I just needed someone to see the good in me and to believe in me and to welcome me. And so I make a concerted effort now to create that space. And I'm grateful because our district does something called Panorama, where we have students answer these questions, and it's an SEL component, and
Right.
there's a whole strand on belonging. And I will pour through that data and look to see like who doesn't feel like they have a person at this school because I want to be that person. I want this library to be that space for them. And so that's when I will make a concerted effort to invite them in during lunch or have them come and join our tea club or just come and hang out if you need a breather. We've got a really cool calming corner over here. So I think it's just about helping people, and not just students, but even the adults in the building, feeling seen and feel valued and feel respected. And that's such a core tenet of librarianship, even with our collections, because we want to have these mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors where everyone can find themselves, but also look outside themselves. And I think it can't just be about the books, it needs to be about humans feeling that as well. And so I have to bring my A game every day, man, because I've got to come in and bring that energy and create that space and help people feel that sense of belonging. That's really so important to me. And it's important work. It is exhausting work, but it is also energizing work at the same time. So some days I come home and I'm completely depleted, but my heart is so full doing the work that I get to do every day. And as I've said to you, it's like there's days I can't believe this is what I get to do as a job. Like it's the best job in the world.
Yeah. I look forward to the day when I get to visit good old Allen B. Shepherd Middle School and head and hang out at the Genius Bar and belly up and see all of the connected and intentional things that you do to build that sense of invitation and belonging, just like the Beatles do.
And I'm going to ask that you bring a really killer playlist that we can have going while you are visiting. That will be a must.
I think I could pull that off in some way, shape, or form. You know, one of the things about the Beatles, and I know you're familiar with George Harrison and his kind of his work in terms of pursuing transcendental meditation and
Mhm.
spirituality. And I've shared a couple of his Eastern inspired songs like The Inner Light and things of that nature. Do you gravitate towards any of those tunes? And do those kind of help shape your mindset when it comes to meditation?
Yeah, from time to time, I kind of, well, you know, I just in our conversations, I go through these little periods where I go down my rabbit holes and I
Right
get
on.
kind of like hooked on something. Um, and as someone who has turned to meditation and I think spirituality more, especially since a really bad car accident I was in 2019, where life was literally stripped away and I was sitting in this black pit and I had to work myself out. I think yeah, there's been points in time where I've kind of leaned into to this. And I think for me, it's a lot of it is thinking about, you know, life's purpose. Why am I here? What am I here to do? Why do bad things happen to us? Like what do we have to gain from that? And so the songs perfectly complement my thinking and then my own, you know, research, but also my journey into meditation and I look at something called theosophy, which is really interesting way of looking at life. And so, yeah, these all kind of blend together and complement each other beautifully.
Gotcha. Thanks for sharing that. Do you have a guilty pleasure Beatles song? You got one like you sing in the shower
Ooh,
or when you're driving from point A to point B and it's on the radio or it comes up on your Apple Music and you
ooh.
go, I'm gonna start, I'm gonna rock out to this.
Gosh, that is so, you know, it's kind of funny when you say that my brain is going to, it's kind of some of the, hang on, I'm going to cheat a little bit here and I'm
You
going to
find,
pull
yeah,
some stuff up. I was like, where's my brain going? Um, I think I tend to go into like some of the older stuff, which is funny because I think generally speaking, I don't tend to go to their older stuff most of the time. But if I just want like pure, unadulterated, just like fun and joy. That's when I want to go to some of the like, you know, Love Me Do, She Loves You, I Want to Hold Your Hand, just those like really sweet, boppy, fun
yeah.
songs. That's where my brain goes. I think that's because that's just the mood I'm in. I just need to be light and fun and airy. And so those are the pieces that kind of come to me.
Is there dancing involved?
Um, there could be. I do love a good kitchen dance party. I mean, like I said, my dad had us trained early on to dance through the house. So, and I now my boys are older, but when they were little, we would have our kitchen dance parties. And I always think, you know, kitchen dance parties solve a lot of problems, and
They do.
they really do help. They are therapy.
They do. I can totally identify with, you know, two of my three daughters being dancers, trained dancers, and
Mm,
you know, so we had a lot of fun with that. Also, and all three of my daughters, we would play Beatles Rock Band on the Wii. So that
that's so
was and I have been known to belt out a pretty fierce version of Helter Skelter, which very few people have heard. In fact, no one has heard outside of my house, with
fun.
the exception of when we saw Paul here in North Carolina a few years ago, and he did Helter Skelter, and I was rocking it out pretty intensely. I think my wife took video of it, and I hope it never sees the light of day. So it's pretty
I
rough.
love that. That's amazing. Yeah, no, I don't have the dance skills per se. I'm sort of like the Elaine from Seinfeld. I don't have a lot of rhythm, but I have fun, and that's all that matters. So,
Nice. So to kind of sum this up, why do the Beatles matter to Andrea Trudeau?
I think for me, there's such a timeless group. Their music is so timeless, and I feel like it connects generations. It's tethered to experiences. I think it is there for us when we're dealing with a whole range of emotions or journeys or searching in a way. Um, and it's just something there when we need it. And I think that's what's beautiful. It's not something I ever get tired of. I always can go back to it and it's exactly what I need in the moment. And there's so much there because there's such a breadth and depth of their work that there's truly something for everyone, um, regardless of what they're experiencing. And I think that's really powerful. I don't think there's many bands that we can say that about.
Yeah. It in many ways it echoes the idea that you've often shared and that you've pursued and marinated over in terms of what makes us human and being human centered. And I know a lot of I know that drives your work in the librarian sense. I know that drives your work in the nonprofit work that you do in Africa. You know that there's this kind of quest that you're on. I see from the cheap seats as your friend, well, not the cheap seats, but
No.
the good seats, not the nosebleeds, but how your work very much echoes and in some ways parallels this kind of thread that the Beatles are exploring in terms of what it means to be human and celebrating that. You know, all of the foibles and all of the, there's darkness in Beatles music. There's light.
Hmm.
There's more light than darkness in Beatles music. And you very much navigate in the light. I mean, you're playing Good Day Sunshine for a reason.
Yeah, I try. I mean, as you and I have talked over the last several months, it's like everyone has bad things that happen to us. And I'm a big believer that there's a reason and that we can turn it into a lesson and we can harness the anger, sadness, fear, what we're feeling when we're sort of sitting in the pit to propel us forward. And I think music has the power to power us through that as well and inspire us and maybe help us get out of the pit. Because when you're sitting in it, no one can get you out but yourself. And I do think music for me has been very powerful in helping me move forward and keep me going when things are really hard. And the Beatles have been part of that journey.
Absolutely. I know that you're an aficionado, and you mentioned this of live music and concerts and shows. And although the Beatles are no longer together, and I don't know if Paul McCartney is heading to Chicagoland anytime soon, or Ringo Starr. I know Ringo's coming to North Carolina, but is
Yeah.
is there a particular song from the Beatles that you would just love to hear live and why?
Ooh, that's a very good question. I feel like I want to hear All You Need Is Love. I just think that's the most beautiful song. And I also think I think it's because I just watched Love Actually and I love the beginning of that film where they surprise the newly married couple and
Yeah.
they do this cool live rendition with and I'm imagining I'm a big sucker when you can have like a chorus and have an orchestra. Oh, I love that. You're showing me a cover. Yes.
Yes. All you
So to
need is
have
love.
I ha oh sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it's all you need is love. It's my single version of it.
That's so cool.
I just so happen to have it. So I would be remiss. I'm sorry to interrupt, but go
No,
ahead. Let
you're
me finish.
good. You're
Yeah.
good. I love that. But I feel like that's a song where I would love to see what they could do with it live. And anytime there's like a huge chorus and an orchestra, I am like a sucker for that. And I just think that's such a beautiful song. Just the message of it is incredible, focused on love and humanity and the light again.
Yeah,
I'm
absolutely.
I'm I'm curious what you would how you would answer that question.
Wow. For me, and I'll probably gravitate towards a song that they did not perform live. So I'll meander there and probably Dear Prudence,
Mm,
which is off the White Album. It's a
hmm.
great song. I know the Beatles rock band video game has a performance of that, but it's animated. It's not the real Beatles, but I just often thought that would be a very amazing song to hear them play live. It's just there's such a groove to it. Very emphatic. John vocal. Paul's bass line is just amazing. Ringo doesn't play on it. Paul plays drums on it. So I would love to hear what Ringo Starr would have done with the backbeat to that song. It's just such a visceral song. for me. I've been in bands where we've played it, and I've not played it well, but that's just kind of a neat song that I cherish a lot. That'd be cool to hear. Thanks for asking.
Well, and you're making, as you were talking, I was thinking about how I really wish Cirque du Soleil's Love still existed because that show was so incredible in Vegas to be able to hear the music so loud and to just see the visual spectacle that they create. I mean, that could be a whole new element to these concerts too. If we can add that to our concert, not only do I want to hear them play this amazing song, but to have the visual spectacle as well,
Yeah.
would be fantastic.
Yeah, it's one of my big regrets, Andrea, is that I did not see it. So I envy those who got to see that once in a lifetime experience because it was so, I mean, was it as immersive as what I think that it was?
Yeah, I mean, the beauty, I've been to several Cirque shows and I love the fact that there's really no bad seat because it's a smaller experience and they really do perform kind of in the round. And that show in particular, some of the shows, there's a definite like focal point and like a storyline. I felt like with that one, there was so much going on at all times. And it was, yeah, you felt like it was truly experiential.
Right.
And hearing the music that loudly was amazing. Yeah, I saw it in Vegas with a friend. And when she first mentioned it, I was like, oh, okay. Like I wasn't super stoked to go, but I was like, I'll go.
Yeah.
Because I was so used to going to the Cirque shows where they created their own, like Alegria, and they have their own music. But they did such an incredible job with it. And the costuming was really cool. And it kind of walks you through the time period that the band existed, with the costuming and what was happening. And I loved all the like 60s hippie vibes that they had going on. So I hope that they bring it back at some point in time so you can see it. It's definitely, I'd love to hear what you think of it.
Yeah.
It's truly an experience.
I hope they bring it back or it tours like a lot of the Cirque du Soleil shows and I will not miss it. I will make sure I have the soundtrack and I love all of the remixes and just the iterations of various Beatles songs. There's just some really cool moments and having seen a couple of clips on YouTube, I can only imagine what it must have been like to experience that. But again, spectacle in the nicest sense of the word and
Hmm.
time must have been amazing.
Yeah, and I'm thinking like I don't know if you've gone to any of those shows like here in Chicago there's they had like a Van Gogh immersive experience where there
Yes,
was beautiful music set and
I've
then
been
the
to one.
paintings
Yeah,
sort of change.
yeah,
And I'm thinking of like the Sphere in Las Vegas. Like someone needs to come up with a Beatles version of that where you can, and this is where my VR nerdiness comes out, because it kind of is VR-esque where you're transplanted to a different space, surrounded by this music and surrounded by this experience. And I think that would be so incredible to do with the Beatles. Someone needs to create that.
we should work on that. I love the whole Van Gogh immersive thing. I did that a few years ago, and I remember being so moved by it to tears. It was just so
Yes.
powerful, and you are, and many you just feel like you're literally in his life, in his headspace, in the paintings, the music, and it's very 360. Um,
Hmm.
that would actually be a kind of a cool project. We always have projects we're working on, and I
Yep.
see this being a really cool VR educational experience and get kids involved, and that would be kind of neat.
Yeah, I mean, there's a huge emotionality piece to VR. So, like you said, it's there's that emotional contagion. So you hear this story and you're so captivated by it and you can't help but react.
Yeah.
So I think that would be incredible.
And that very much happens on a lot of the Beatles albums. There is, and it may not be intentional. I think there was a level of intentionality in Sergeant Pepper where you're kind of in this conceptual concert, or that was one of the ideas, and they had sound effects. The White Album, although it doesn't necessarily tell a story, but there are elements in the White Album that have a narrative thread to it. I'm thinking about like the avant-garde piece Revolution Number 9. Uh,
Hmm.
or the suite of songs that close out Abbey Road. There's this kind
Hmm.
of thread, and there's this visualization part. You can kind of tell a story in your mind. A lot of the Beatles songs kind of, are kind of VR before VR was a thing. Some of that, may have had something to do with some of the chemicals that they were experimenting with at the time, right?
Sure.
But a song like Tomorrow Never Knows, which is kind of a pretty cool fixture in the Love soundtrack when it's mashed up with the song Within You, Without You. John Lennon, went to George Martin and said, listen, I want the sound of 1,000 Dalai Lamas, chanting on a mountaintop. That's the sound I want. And you're going to help me get it. And they didn't it was impossible to record 1,000 Dalai Lamas on a mountaintop, but that again, I just there's something VR about that. There's something that in many ways speaks to the innovative nature of
Hmm.
the Beatles and what they're doing in terms of word paintings and this kind of strong cinematic in some of their songs element to their music before VR was even invented.
Even before MTV, like
Even
before we
before
had music,
MTV, exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
before our music videos, like it is pretty incredible. And to think about their evolution over the years too. I think it would be an incredible story to tell.
Yeah. Well, let's get together with the Beatles people. Call Apple. We'll reach out to Paul and Ringo and let's see what we can do.
Yeah,
We talked about
yeah.
earlier just about just shooting our shot, right? So what
There we go.
what have we got to lose? As my dad says, there's only one of two answers to the question, right? So hey, let's
Yeah.
let's just add that to the projects.
Okay. For sure. Adding it to the list.
Speaking of projects, and I know that you are involved in so many good things for education and our world. I would be remiss if I didn't ask about your nonprofit work in Africa. And again, it does echo this kind of global sense that the Beatles had. You mentioned All You Need Is Love, which there's a whole backstory behind that song and how that was the, part of the first televised satellite program, in 1967. The Beatles music is, just transcends borders. Paul just did a tour of Central and South America. There's a strong element of that as well. But then also I think about some of the charity work that all four of them have done for various organizations, or George in doing before Live Aid the concert for Bangladesh, 1971. So I know that this project and this work that you're doing with two of your friends is very important to you. So I'd love for you to mention that, because it is in many ways a continuation of the Beatles' legacy, in my opinion.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, so little backstory, I guess, for your listeners. In the summer of 2022, I spent 6 weeks teaching in Tanzania and Kenya as a Fulbright Hays Scholar. So I was working on my PhD at Northern Illinois University, and they have this incredible program called Educate Global. And for that term, there were three professors. So Dr. James Cohen, Dr. Kurt Thurmeyer, and Dr. Teresa Wasonga, who earned this awesome grant from the United States, and were able to take seven graduate students and six undergrad students to basically have an immersive cultural experience. And it was all about being immersed in this culture, but also looking at our own cultural identities, looking at our own, for me, my own white privilege, and what I carry with me to this place on the other side of the world. And in terms of timing, it was like the worst timing ever because it was right around the time my candidacy exam was due. And anyone that is in a doctoral program knows that it's extremely stressful time. And I had to get my exam in a month early to go on this trip. Um, and when I was there, I was originally going to keep working on my doctorate, and I decided, no, you're going to unplug and truly be present for these 6 weeks. And
Mm.
it turned out that that 6 weeks completely and utterly changed my entire trajectory of my life. And
Wow.
what's weird is before I went, I had several friends and even family members who were kind of like pushing their anxiety on me, like, "Oh, you're leaving your family for 6 weeks." Like I have teenage sons at that time. You're leaving your husband. You're leaving your sons. You're a woman traveling alone. Why are you doing this? And the whole time, I was like, "This is just like what is supposed to be." There was no anxiety or nervousness. It felt like I was destined to do this work. I know that sounds a little hokey, but
Mm.
I I just like in every cell of my body, I knew this is what I was supposed to be doing. And the experience was absolutely life changing. I could talk hours upon hours about that. Enough so that when I came home, I realized working in a really privileged community that there was still more work to be done. So since returning, it's I've been focused very much on raising awareness for the students I work with because they travel the world, but they're staying at the Four Seasons. They're going to Italy over Christmas. They aren't really seeing the world and how people live, nor do they really understand how fortunate they are. So I have found ways to integrate my work and what I did there into different units throughout the school year to talk to the students about it and open their eyes. And it inspired two of my friends, Amanda Jones, who's a Louisiana school librarian, and Tom Bober, who's a Missouri school librarian, so much that we decided to create a nonprofit called Librarians Building Libraries, LBL. And so we are now working to raise funds to go to Kenya. So I'll be going back to the Jane Adeni Memorial School where I taught in 2022. It's an all-girls secondary school started by Dr. Teresa Wasonga. Um, and it is an incredible place. If these girls weren't at this school on scholarship, many of them would be married. They'd be uneducated, and they would basically spend their lives toting water and caring for their home.
Mm.
And this school gives them so much opportunity. And these are girls that are going on to get master's degrees, doctoral degrees. They are brilliant, strong, resilient, beautiful human beings. And they need a library. So they have a library, but it's the books are not organized, they're not cataloged. The space is literally just a home for books. And Dr. Wasonga has asked us to come and create a community space, kind of like the library I work in now. So we are going to fulfill her vision, and we're really excited to do this work. So we're fundraising and working with different corporations to get materials over there so that we can go and support this space for these girls because they deserve it. They're incredible human beings, and I think about them every day.
Wow. That is so inspiring and so life affirming and kind of like the Beatles, when you listen to one of their albums or their songs, it just makes you feel like the world's a little bit better. And here you are making the world a better place for so many in this project. If folks want to donate or want to send books to add to the collection, and I'm thinking, if I wanted to send some Beatle books or something, what's the best way to do that for this project?
So we have a website. So we are a nonprofit, so you can make a tax deductible donation. So I can give you our building libraries website so people can go directly there. We are going to be hosting a really cool webinar at the end of January, January 30th, where we're going to have some famous authors talk about like their love of libraries. We're also going to feature Dr. Teresa Wasonga, the school's founder, and I'll be interviewing her so you can learn a little bit more about her incredible journey. This woman should do a TED Talk. She's phenomenal.
Nice.
And then in the spring, or well, kind of late winter, we're going to be collecting materials that the school needs. I know offhand they need sheets, they need soccer cleats. So I will be collecting things at my home and shipping them over. It takes months for them to get there. So we're hoping to get a bunch of supplies and things sent over so that when we arrive, we'll have the supplies we need for the library, but also other supplies to help the girls. So people can certainly get in touch with me through our organization's website or Twitter or Blue Sky. And if anyone's interested in doing some kind of fundraiser through their school, we are open to all ideas.
Awesome. I'll be sure to put all of the links to that work and your various platforms in the show notes. And I will also be happy to send a copy of the Pepper Effect your way.
Yes,
Add to the collection. I'd be honored
that
if
would.
you'd accept that.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. And they have such amazing teachers there. Some of them are our previous students, and it's such an innovative space. And so I know that they would absolutely love your book, just as I did when I read it. And I think it would really change some of the ways that they think about teaching. So that would go a long way. They would really appreciate that. Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you. The honor is all mine, Andrea. I'm so grateful for you and grateful for our time together and just really cherish your words and your memories on a band that means so much to both of us.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. And I'm so excited for this class you're going to be teaching and can't wait to see what you do with your students. They don't even realize how lucky they are yet.
Oh, you are so kind, my friend. Well, this brings us to the end of just a really great conversation. Every conversation I have with Andrea Trudeau is always great and fulfilling and affirming. And I hope that those of you who are listening are able to connect with Andrea. I will be sharing all of her links and handles in the show notes. This is Sean Gaylord with Why the Beatles Matter with my great friend and guest, Dr. Andrea Trudeau. As always, stay fab and thanks for tuning in.